Hey, Joe.
Hey,
How are
hi.
you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm terrific. And that is a nice looking t-shirt you've got there, sir.
Oh, this. Well, thank you. It's a. I like the color, and may I say yours is quite
Yes,
complimentary as
thank
well.
you. It suits my palate as well.
It does.
Where did you get it?
Why, as a matter of fact, this is our new Everyday Night shirt with the logo on the front and
And
list of virtues and their website URL on the back. But, these are not just for us.
what? What do
Yep.
you say?
Yes, yes. It's amazing, isn't it?
It
That
is.
such a fancy shirt could be yours.
And for free.
Yes.
Well,
How?
there's a tiny cost.
Yes. And what is that?
Well, we're doing this as a promotion. We are so strapped for ideas. We're going to you to help us. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to how are we going to have them contact us, Joe?
Well,
Comment
that's
on the YouTube video.
comment on the YouTube video or on the YouTube video.
Oh, okay.
I think that would be the best way to do
Okay,
that.
very good.
And uh, and
And you,
what are we asking them to comment?
we are asking them to suggest a topic for one of our discussions.
I think
Um,
that's a great idea.
we are coming up on our 100th episode, episode number 100, right? And we are planning to do the drawing and announce the winners
At the
at
end
the end of that
of the
video.
our 100th episode.
Okay, so between now and then, you send us your suggestions. If we use your suggestion, you will get one of these fabulous t-shirts, probably in black. Or if you have a color that we can easily find, give us a second choice.
And that I think this is a wonderful and terrific idea, but I don't think it goes far enough.
Well, what would you suggest, sir?
I would
I'm all
suggest
ears.
I would suggest that from everyone who comments on one of our videos between now and the 100th episode, that we randomly choose a name, and that person also gets a t-shirt.
Okay. So are we going to have them um, comment on this video that they've just watched?
They can comment on this one that's upcoming because we're
Well, they're
we're
watching it
they're
now.
watching it now. And
And this is episode 98,
90
right?
97, 98, 90. It's somewhere up in there. And
Okay.
on this one, the next one, then the 100th episode. Well, they can't because we'll
The
be
100th is where we will announce the
right. So in the
winners.
next couple of 2, 3 episodes, comment from everybody who comments, we will randomly choose someone. So the 2 t-shirts we'll be giving away.
Great. This is terrific. So you are all encouraged and invited to make that comment. Even if it's a ridiculous comment, go ahead and put it in there. You might get a shirt out of it.
Yes.
And it might not be as ridiculous as you think, or it may not even be as ridiculous as one we've already done. So,
So
so
with that, I think we will proceed to our evening's discussion. So
okay.
thank you, everybody. We'll be looking for your suggestions and your topics and your comments.
Good luck.
Yep. See you soon. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, I've been thinking about children's stories,
Okay.
but I've been thinking about the way people learn history as children's stories. And then if they have no further pursuit of education in history, or their teachers don't, they end up taking those children's stories into their adulthood and believing them to be true. And so
Actual history.
hmm?
Believing them to be
Yes,
actual
believing them
history.
the actual history. So I thought what we could talk about are the myths, folklore, um, um, and um, true but embellished stories
Sure.
of that that people grow up with, because this relates to the
Well, no,
virtues.
we might talk about not just what people were taught as children and grew up with, but have been purposefully and
Yes,
maliciously perpetrated.
yes, but I think it starts when people are taught, if people are taught as children to simply accept what they're hearing as true without questioning it,
You mean
instead of being,
you mean like going to church?
well, yeah, if your church teaches you that um as I was once told by someone who I disagreed with, God doesn't care if you believe, only that you obey.
Uh, well, that's is that a Jewish, more of a Jewish
Well, not the way I practice it. The way
well,
I
no, I mean,
practice,
from whom did you get that
I
instruction?
got that from somebody who was Jewish, extremely Orthodox,
Okay,
who was telling me that. It's like, um, you know,
because
and
a lot of Christian
oh,
churches say that faith
say
is the only way, and that
yes,
unless you have faith and until you accept Jesus, your good works don't matter.
right.
So there's a
So
dichotomy.
what I have maintained is that the divine endowed us each with abilities, including the capacity to think and reason and question. And if we have an obligation to the divine, it is to use our abilities to the fullest. And that includes thinking and reasoning and questioning, not simply obeying. So, and this was my response. And it 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 the person I was talking to um didn't quite know what to do with that.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, well, think about it, because you have the ability to, right? It's like somebody who says, it's like the old story of there's a flood coming. The police drive up to a guy's house and say, we're evacuating you because there's a flood coming. And he says, the Lord will provide. And then the waters rise, and he's on the second floor, and a boat comes by and say, we're here to rescue you. He says, the Lord will provide. And then he's on the roof, and a helicopter comes by. He says, no, the Lord will provide. And he drowns. And he meets the Lord and says, why? I said you were provided. And God turns to him and says, I gave you three chances. What do you want?
Yeah,
Right?
I sent you a boat, and I sent you a car, and I sent you a
Right.
helicopter.
So it's, yes. So there are myths people learn in childhood, and I wasn't intending this to go into a religious
No,
discussion,
right.
but there are some of those that are true. By extension, there are some of those that are true, that people learn these things and never question them. And without getting into stories of mistranslations and edited texts and all that sort of thing, it's still a question. And I tell my students, and have always told my students, question everything. I
Hmm.
have I have disagreed with, or at least questioned, something on almost every page of almost every textbook I've ever read. And if I tell you something and you question me about it and I can't give you good evidence and backup and sources and reasoning behind it, shame on me. And thank you for pointing that out. Um, but specifically, I was thinking about American mythology.
Right.
Right. And
Sort of
mythology,
patriotic
folklore,
sort of myths.
what's that?
Patriotic sort of myths.
Patriotic myths, um, and also self-serving political myths that
Okay.
that are would fall under um well, propaganda
Yeah.
or storytelling. So for example, let's begin with the first question of the evening.
Ah,
Ah,
okay.
okay.
I have faith
You
that
do? I think it is not a myth to say that we start these episodes with an adult libation of some sort.
indeed, indeed, and
And
experience will have borne that out.
yes, so there's evidence.
I think a reasonable assumption can be made.
Yes. Well, I'd say it's an extrapolation from previous data. It does not predict necessarily the future, but there is a greater likelihood of that continuing.
That's the way to bet.
Yes. So, what are you drinking this evening?
I am drinking Evan Williams eggnog
Okay.
in this in the season. I thought
Yes.
um, it's a it's an eggnog cream liqueur made with Evan Williams straight Kentucky bourbon whiskey.
Okay. You do with the eggnog and your comfy shawl collar sweater
Yes.
that
Yes.
appeared and it turned like you appeared to about to be ready to introduce a PBS program about great literature.
Yes, or I was going to introduce a British theater company.
Yes.
And you, sir,
Maybe,
what are you
oh,
drinking? Why
maybe,
are you wearing
maybe
that awful sweater?
it's comfortable.
Okay.
I was thinking Jeff and Joe's Poetry Corner, but not anymore.
Oh, good, no,
Um,
good heavens, no.
so I have
My
a glass.
poetry is about as good as your singing.
Okay, that's you can make that point. I have a glass of Mayomi Pinot Noir.
Okay,
It's I like it.
there, enough reason.
Yeah, here.
Cheers.
So the first one story that comes to mind is George Washington as a child cutting down a cherry tree and his father asking him if he did. And he said, yes, says, yes, father, I cannot tell a lie. I cut down the cherry tree.
Yep,
People think that's true.
yep.
I
They-
call it a myth because it was completely invented by Washington's biographer, who published his first biography of Washington shortly after George Washington's death. And that story wasn't even included until something like the fifth edition. He kept
oh,
embellishing and adding
right.
stuff. Um, but there are people who think it's true.
Well, I wondered about, even when I heard the story as a kid, I wondered, why would you just go randomly chop down a cherry tree? I mean, what kind of a monster child was George Washington as a kid? He was maliciously cutting down fruit trees, you know?
I was once at a Renaissance festival, and a bunch of us had gone. We'd done a demonstration for our medieval reenactment group. So I was in armor and had a sword, and I was walking around, and there was this little kid who'd gotten a wooden sword, and he was going to town on anything and everything. And there was a small sapling, and he was whacking at the sapling. And I came up behind him and stood over and I tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned around
Hmm.
and then looked up and saw me. And I spoke in a very quiet voice and said, "A sword is a responsibility. One must only use one sword to, defend the right and the good and use it justly. And if you are going to carry a sword, you must behave with honor and dignity." And I started sounding like a Klingon, I'm sure. His mother was nearby, and I caught her eye, and she nodded and smiled. So I said, "Is this what?" And I didn't kneel down because I wanted to, you
Hmm.
know, that voice of authority from above. And I said, "Do you understand?" And he understood. And then I said, "Hence, go forth and be a good knight." And he walked off.
Don't attack defenseless vegetation.
Right. Um, so yeah, and I thought about Washington, the cherry tree at that time, and I did that. um, but there are other stories that are true but have been embellished or have changed in the retelling. Benjamin Franklin and the kite. Kite sends up a kite and lightning. In order to, as I have heard the story, to discover electricity, to invent electricity.
Yeah.
Neither of those are true. Of course, he didn't invent electricity, and he didn't discover electricity was known. What Franklin was doing was was his experiment was to demonstrate that lightning was electricity. And this, he continued his experiments, and this led to his invention of the lightning rod, which was a terrific invention.
Because his first,
Also,
the famous experiment that people think about it, the kite wasn't even struck by lightning. That probably would have killed him.
yes,
It just
it
developed
was
a static charge that he could see on the ground.
exactly. It was the ambient charge in the electrified air. So, um, but we often see the cartoon versions of things, and people think that cartoons are history. People think that Hollywood movies are history. Um, Storytelling, even a movie doesn't even always closely resemble the novel it came from,
Right.
let alone history. Um, so that's another one I thought of as, but so there's an example of myth and the cherry tree story that was actually created, an example of something that was true but embellished, and then an example of folklore. And you brought up this example of folklore.
Paul Bunyan, or I mean,
Oh,
I threw out several.
John Henry
John Henry.
and Paul Bunyan, both of those
Yeah.
are examples. Because there's no evidence that they
Well,
existed.
I mean, there's a bunch of those. There's
Though I call Paul Bunyan more of a myth because he was a
yes,
giant,
obviously, yeah.
right? Whereas John Henry could have been an actual person,
What he did was probably impossible.
right?
But now, and this is at this point, I want to kind of point out that folklore and myth have cultural value because they're supposed to demonstrate cultural values. You know, the thing that this myth or this folklore or whatever talks about is usually trying to instill some virtue or scare you away from some vice that your culture thinks is important.
Yes,
So
yes.
so there's value to them, and we shouldn't all look at it as horrible lies that have been perpetrated on us. Not all of them, some of them, but not all of them have been these terrible lies that they're trying to drive us all into this pen where we can all be homogenized. They're trying in some way to make a cohesive culture out of us. And that's no, this is not just Americans, right? I mean, this is throughout history and all over the world. That's what stories and legends and folklore do.
Yes, and propaganda too.
Well, and propaganda is trying to
Right,
force us all into a pen where we can be homogenized.
right.
That's
So, and John Henry, there are arguments about whether or not he did or did not exist.
yeah.
There and it's unclear.
You know what?
Um,
I would love somebody to rewrite John Henry as a Union leader. The
hmm,
steel driving man
yeah,
against
yeah, yeah.
against the machine, that's going to replace him.
Against AI, maybe.
Well, I mean, it's going to go back to the factory worker, right? And
Yes.
but yeah, that's I
So
mean that's
there are just to be clear, there are historical records that could indicate that there was a John Henry who did what they were thinking of, but it's not it's one of those things that will always be questioned. It's not
yeah,
quite clear. So it is folklore in the sense of something that could be true or has a kernel of truth, could be embellished, becomes folklore. And the story and I think the song,
yeah.
um, and certainly like the movie of, did we mention Johnny Appleseed? Not yet,
No, not yet.
I think. But the movie of him made it appear a certain way, like cartoons of Franklin and the lightning made it appear a certain way, and the song about John Henry made it appear a certain way.
Right.
Um, and so Johnny Appleseed was a real person, John Chapman, who planted apple trees from seed.
Right.
Um, he
Just
was also a missionary. What's that?
the myth is that he just wandered the wilderness throwing apple seeds out of a sack, right?
Yes, but he actually planted them. There was a requirement for settlers to grow orchards, and he wanted to see the West settled, but he also used it as an opportunity to be a missionary.
Yeah.
Um, but what I found interesting is that the apples he was planting were not edible apples primarily were used to make hard cider on the frontier,
Right.
um, which was safe to drink. And so the bitter apples that he was planting the trees for were used for making hard cider. And a lot of his trees were actually cut down by the FBI during Prohibition, the trees he planted. And that's when apple growers started making apples by cross pollinating and selective breeding and grafting and so on. Apples that were edible apples for eating apples or baking apples, which they weren't used really before that very much.
Right.
They were sold as being nutritious. Um, I I think in some ways we could talk about the food pyramid, the old food pyramid, which
Oh,
was actually
yeah.
wasn't even based on common nutritional understanding at the time, but was to promote certain industries.
That's propaganda. That's where we
Yes,
get
that's
propaganda.
propaganda.
I
Um,
mean, we could talk about a little bit about the shift, the modern myth of the Native American as the ultimate perfect conservationist. Um,
yeah.
and even the Johnny Appleseed thing, of the we have this sort of modern belief that, oh, before America, or before the Industrial Revolution, that all the water was pure, and all the air was clean, and you could just wander the wilderness and survive. And that's crazy. People die in the wilderness all the time.
Yes, yes. And um, there was also no modern medicine.
Right,
And
right.
um,
And but I mean, I'm talking about these pure crystal clear streams were not healthy to drink from.
no, the water in the frontier, it's one of the reasons that people were drinking hard cider
Right,
because it was safe to drink, because water was not necessarily safe to drink.
right.
And um, yeah, exactly. Um, well, so in addition to children's stories as history, people will then look back at history and reinterpret it to serve their own agendas.
Right.
And one of the things that's incredibly difficult to do is to actually understand the mindset, the attitudes, the philosophy, the beliefs of people of a different time. It's
Yes.
extremely difficult to do. Um,
And we're reenactors, and we recognize
yes, it's very difficult to do, to understand that. And even reading the even reading language from just a couple hundred years ago, just
oh, yeah.
even reading Dickens or Melville is
Oh man, Melville.
really
Oh,
difficult for a lot of people because of the way it's written. Even reading Tolkien is not easy for a lot of people because he intentionally wrote in kind of an archaic style.
yeah, an archaic, heroic sort of. He
Right,
was trying to copy sagas that he had
right.
encountered. Yeah,
But it was appropriate to what he was writing. But
yeah.
to so the idea of actually understanding people, extremely difficult. It's one of the things about um, alien encounter science fiction movies that um, where it's people immediately, people, humans and aliens understanding each other, being able to talk to each other, the human hero jumping into an alien spaceship and being able to fly it. And
I
a
think
lot of
that
people can't even operate somebody else's phone or
or drive a stick shift.
right, exactly.
Well, I thought Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I thought was one of the first movies that really dealt with how do we communicate with an utterly alien intelligence.
Right.
And you look for commonality of some kind, and it was math that is also music, and music as math, and that was how Close Encounters approached it.
The What was the Jodie Foster movie? Contact,
Yeah,
I think. That really was a lot of the core of that story. Was
yeah,
that
but they
Jodie
kind of
Foster or no? That
yeah.
was no, she that was the one where she went no, it's a different, I'm thinking of a different movie. The
The Jodie Foster one, they sort of skip over the whole alien contact thing as this intelligence that can just read her mind.
yes, I was
So,
thinking of a different one though, where the there's graphic symbolism that turns out to be three-dimensional. I don't think it's um I'll think about it.
okay,
Well,
well, this is
it'll
going a
come
little
back to me.
this is a little tangential, but
Yes, but it'll come back to me. But it's the idea of um understanding other people. And in a lot of ways, that's what we're talking about. Myth and folklore and stories, as you said, propagate culture.
right.
And it's a way of understanding people. I think that one of the things I remember when I was I was in junior high and I wanted to read these great, what I think it was the great 19th century adventure stories,
Mm.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Three Musketeers, The Time Machine, all those, the big adventure stories. The librarian, oh, she was terrible. She didn't want me to read them. And she thought, no, you shouldn't read those.
'Cause you're too
Right.
young or because
Yeah,
you were.
too young, apparently.
Mm.
So I brought my mother in to school, and my mother went to the librarian and said, he has my permission to read anything he wants to. And if he doesn't understand something, he'll ask us about it and we'll talk about it. Are we clear? She said, yes. And I started reading those books and they were great. And Jekyll and Hyde and great, great stories. But there were ways of literature is a way of fiction, is a way of thinking about things, thinking about other people and their experiences. I think that fiction and theater are ways that kids can learn how to process their own emotions. And I think, um, anyway, it's also tangential. Um, I think another myth that has become propaganda is the myth of the self-made man.
Okay. In this country, certainly it's
Yes.
central to our capitalist argument,
And it relates to the philosophy of individualism versus that of community.
right?
And the,
Well,
the
it comes from the sort of pioneer mythos, if you will, of somebody striking off on their own and getting a plot of land and planting it and raising their own livestock and
yes,
you know, creating a livelihood out of nothing, right? And I mean, technically possible, but if you're going to survive more than one or two generations in that, you need to start a community.
yes. And as we've talked about before, community is what enabled the human species to thrive and survive and evolve.
Exactly.
So somebody wants to clear the wilderness and create their homestead. They have to have tools.
Right.
Did they? So where do they get the tools? Barter? Did they mine the iron ore, smelt it, hammer
Right.
it into? Where did they get the tools for that? Where did they get the anvil? Where did they get the forge? Where did they get there? It's community, it's specialization and trade and those things that even in frontier communities, in some communities now, they have community barn raisings
Yeah.
and house building
Sure.
and things. Um, so there's a
Well, and there's the stories of, I mean, pioneer communities in the old west, so to speak, where they would advertise for people like blacksmiths and
yeah, yeah,
school teachers and professional craftspeople to come to their and to be the core of their town.
yeah,
Skills that not every person has, or the facility to start from scratch.
exactly. And there are um there's a widely circulated story that was written about the self-made man, but he's driving on roads that
Right.
taxes paid for. He's drinking clean water because of government regulation.
Environmental
He's
protection.
eating safe food and taking safe medication and all of these things. Community is what has is the key. And there are societies that are more let's say, communitarian or collectivism has become a pejorative by the libertarians, but it means that community, and it's useful to understand that. Oh, Arrival, that's it. It's not.
Oh, okay.
It's Amy Adams. Um,
Okay.
yeah, that's the movie. Um, and it's another one about alien communication. Um, it's questionable whether we'd even recognize that alien intelligence if we encountered it. Um, but
Yeah, if there may be no common method for communication.
yeah,
We,
I think that
their senses may be so removed from ours if they, but we don't need, we're gonna have this whole conversation, but
yeah.
um,
So I think that self-made man thing is a myth, that it's actually a form of propaganda too. Horatio Alger Jr. was an author. He wrote novels about young men from humble means who were able to work their way up into the middle class,
right,
not about somebody who came from nothing and became wealthy,
right.
but that American dream, you can work your way up to the middle class. Well, it's extremely difficult. It's possible, but I contend that one of the things our country, any society should do is make that more possible for people. Pave
Right.
the way a little bit, as we should
Well,
do, because the more people who can do that, the better society, and we all benefit.
I think part of what we should need to be on guard against is the myth or the dream, the idea is that, and this is kind of a collectivist outlook, is that if you can make everything better for everybody, you get a reward for it. You know what? If I, building the better mousetrap, right? It's
Right.
you innovate and you find a thing that makes everybody's life easier, you get a reward for that. And that's an incentive to do
Yes.
those things. But what we've come to now is you're not you're exploiting rather than uplifting. And we, as in the American sort of ideal, the system of our economy is it only making money matters. There's no right, no wrong. There's only profit, and that justifies anything.
Yeah, that's deadly to a society.
Yep, and we're seeing that
Yeah.
death.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and this kind of, in some ways, we talked about this, the sort of sweeping myth of the founding fathers fought a war for equality and freedom for all. No, that's not really at all what they had in mind.
They were wealthy landowners and business owners, and they didn't like paying taxes to the British.
And we couch that as in taxational representation. And yeah, there's that. That's an
Yeah.
aspect of it. But we were a colony, and colonies, almost by definition, are exploited,
Yes.
especially in
So
that.
it was decolonization, and that's a good thing. Um,
But it's interesting to note that George Washington extended the war, refused to stop fighting at Congress's bidding until the rightful property was returned. Uh, American expats who had moved to England during the war had taken their slaves with them. Well, the UK had done away with slavery a century before. So they emancipated all of the slaves that the Americans brought with them, and Washington wanted them back as slaves.
Oh, I-
He thought that that was illegal, that was stealing American property.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that one. Wow. Were
So
they returned? Yeah.
I don't think so.
Oh,
Because
wow.
that's why the war went on as long as it did. And
I
it wasn't like we won and they picked up and left.
yeah.
Other countries started recognizing us as a
Yeah.
new country, and the Brits were finally realized that this is too expensive, and the rest of the civilized world recognizes them as a separate country now. So
I will, I will, I will say that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are brilliant. Flawed, and the Constitution, certainly it's been amended, but I mean, it's brilliant. And it was a terrific thing that they did, even if their reasons were not pure, they did a good thing.
well, yeah, I think that it's noteworthy and worthy that they were trying to do something that had not been done before
Yeah.
in any real sense, on any real scale, of rejecting the idea that divine right determines rule.
And divine right of kings was not was a relatively new concept. Actually, it had been kingship had not always been stated as a divine right. It had been. I mean, obviously, if you go back to Egypt, it was, but it had not always been in every place a divine right or the king as a divine representative. That was really expressed in that way, in a newer way. But because you saw it there, I mean, there were, well, William of Normandy, he had a claim, tenuous, but a claim.
Right.
He invaded England, he won, he's now the king, his heirs, right? And then,
But he was crowned in a church
yes, he
by the
was.
church.
Yes, he
So
was.
and all the successors and
So,
all of Western
so
Europe,
God decided he should win,
exactly,
like
might makes
trial by
right.
combat, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's Western Europe, which is where all of our colonies sprang from. That was their history,
Yeah.
was one form or another. So they were trying to reject that and form well a republic, you
Yes. If they
know, in which the
succeeded.
Greeks, which the well yeah, which the Greeks and even the early Romans talked about having. But it was more of a plutocracy or an oligarchy in
Well,
practice.
even the American democracy was at the
Hmm.
beginning because only landowning men could vote.
Right. Oh yeah, sure.
So,
And we're a republic in an aspect that, and we've talked about this before a little bit, that I certainly believe, and it's clear in the early documents that the founding fathers didn't think of us as a country. They talked about these United States
yeah.
and the Union, like the European Union, where these are separate states with their own cultures and their own laws. And we have this sort of overriding agreement that had mostly to do with commerce and common defense.
Hmm.
But even at that, the Second Amendment, that's what the Second Amendment is talking about really, is a state's right to maintain an armed militia
To
to defend itself
defend,
against other states.
yeah, to,
Yes,
but also to defend the United States against
against
foreign
foreign
countries
aggressors. Yes,
because the United States was just formed. They wanted to be able to maintain and defend it against invasion by the world powers of France and
sure.
Germany and England and so on.
But even then, there were no standing professional armies.
Correct.
They did not exist at that time. There was no United States Army.
No. It
So
how the United States came to have a national identity is, I think, one of the products of folklore and myth that we've been talking about.
right. Well, in the Civil War,
Yes,
I
that,
mean,
yes.
gave the federal government the the federal. I mean, this is kind of true, and I almost kind of hate to admit it, but the federal government used the Civil War to amass power in this country
Well,
because it had to.
yeah.
But it didn't hand it back over after the war was over.
Well, any entity or office that ever accrues power never, hardly ever
Right.
relinquishes it to return to a previous state. Um, but there, yeah.
Well, but oddly, that is what, in my mind, makes George Washington one of the great figures in our history.
Yeah,
Is that he did exactly that.
yes.
He retired. He said, here's your army back, Congress. I'm retired," and he left and only remained very peripherally in politics after that.
After presidency, and
Yeah,
established the idea of the tradition of two terms, which then had to be put into law.
right,
Um, although it was put into law by the political opponents of Franklin Roosevelt, because
right.
they didn't want him to continue. And then they were the same Republicans who did that, well, the same party, wanted to repeal that to see that to get Reagan elected to a third term. Which,
Yeah, that died early.
yes, it
That
did. It did. Um,
so we've got lots of sort of myths but it is a form of propaganda, just
yeah.
like you were talking about, and it's
Well,
a
and we haven't even touched on, I'd say, economic myths, like trickle down economics is a disproven myth that people still hang on to, and there are all sorts of myths too that people will vehemently argue uh, as accurate without evidence. So,
yeah, from both
or or
directions, really.
or despite evidence, yeah, from all directions.
Yeah, I mean, communism is no more viable than absolute capitalism for the good of a state.
Communism is as big a fantasy as a libertarian state or a laissez-faire capitalist state.
Yeah,
Capitalism is an economic system, not a form of
right.
government, but there are people who think it is a form of government.
Well,
So
so
the
and so is
economy is,
communism
yeah.
technically,
Well,
but
yeah, but it
it
becomes
requires
both of those can become totalitarianism, which is a form of government, and that's what we need to avoid.
yeah.
So, um,
And this is a sort of popular form of modern propaganda, is that we have to become totalitarian to stop communism, which it's it's blows my mind that
yeah,
people are buying this without realizing it. Maybe it hasn't been pointed out to them that way, is that what you are talking about is, as has happened in modern history, you're adopting a fascist stop communists, which you only understand as authoritarian.
yes,
The two are at the top, they're the same.
right. There can be authoritarians all across. There can be all sorts of authoritarians,
Yeah,
totalitarians. That's a form of government. The economic system is something else. Some economic systems tend to promote totalitarianism, and some less so, but but a pure libertarian society leads to simply anarchy and is and anti-community
Yeah,
organization um, is also not viable. It's also a fantasy.
right. I had this conversation with people about communism is a completely benign sort of uh, theory, really,
Yeah,
and it can work and has worked and can exist in small communities. The problem with communism is that it doesn't scale.
right.
So, you need to have a government that forces that scale to remain in to that philosophy to remain in place on a large scale, and
Yeah,
that becomes totalitarianism.
yeah.
So,
That's well succinctly stated.
yeah,
Yeah.
and capitalism is kind of the same way. If you
Unregulated capitalism
right,
is
becomes an
is
oligarchy without fail.
right where power accrues and wealth accrues to those who already have it, and everyone else suffers. And we are seeing the new Roaring Twenties, where the oligarchy is ascendant, and
They're a
where
little savvier about it, though.
I hope so.
I mean, well, no, I mean they're better at
Oh, they are savvier
yeah,
about
they
that.
are. They're better at
I thought you were
maintaining a
saying we
low
are.
profile with their
Yes,
incredible wealth,
yes,
or or trying to make them. I'm trying to make themselves heroes by
yes,
dint of their wealth, and that happened in the 30s.
yes. Well,
Um,
the
or
Horatio
I'm
Alger's story myth.
well, no,
Um,
I'm talking about
well, yeah, but I'm saying that some of the making them here selves portraying themselves as heroes now
oh,
is a variation on the Horatio Alger story. I've achieved this and I'm a hero now in some ways.
well, that's because being rich is in our sort of American mythos is we've built this sort of crazy idea that um, if you however you if you have made it to the top, if you are rich, you somehow automatically deserve it because you've won, you've done something better than somebody else.
Yeah, that actually is an old um uh, forget which particular flavor of Christianity that is. Calvinism? No, I'm not sure which one. Um, that wealth is an indication of God's favor.
Oh,
I forget which flavor that was, but there are people who still think that.
well, there's whole churches
Oh, the whole
based around it.
prosperity gospel
Well,
thing.
that's kind of a reversal of it. It's that
Yeah,
you became wealthy because God loves you, and in the new thing, it's if God loves you enough, He'll make you wealthy.
right.
It's a very fine. It's a just a little tiny little bar to step
Yeah,
over.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
I think
I'll
that
pray to God for you. I mean, this is the worst sort of abuse of religion there is.
I think the the point of what we're talking about is that facing the myths and propaganda and folklore and stories with to understand what the reality truly is requires the virtues of courage to face that, honesty and humility. You have to admit that maybe what you believed, maybe you don't know everything. You have to have courage to face that idea, and you have to seek the truth relentlessly.
Yes, or at least when you're slapped in the face by it, don't reject it out of hand
Well,
and fight against it with everything you've got.
as we talked about when we talked about cognitive dissonance and bias.
Yeah.
A lot of people will do that. They're confronting someone because it feels like that to them, but really presenting someone with data and facts that refute what they're saying often, most times, only causes them to believe their opinions more firmly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
often I will say, why do you believe that? What's your evidence? How can you prove it? How can you explain it to me? Can you prove it to me? And I'll ask them to do, okay, you presented this as evidence. Why do you accept this as evidence? How do you know this is true? And just keep asking them questions. It's time consuming and it doesn't always work, but it's one of the few techniques I've found to get people to start questioning their own assumptions.
right. And this is kind of where the phrase "the truth hurts" comes
Yeah,
from. You know, it's not just about a truth about you. The truth hurt. Well, you're just not as smart as the other kids. The truth hurts. That's not all of what that means. The truth, if it is something you don't already believe, can be painful.
yes.
It
Well,
can be made less painful if you, like anything, you can inure yourself to the pain by experiencing it more often,
yeah.
right?
And remembering that brutal honesty, people who advocate brutal honesty are often more interested in the brutal than the honest.
Yeah.
So I always advocate for people to pursue, as I said, pursue the truth relentlessly. And if you don't like the truth, the facts don't matter. Don't care if the truth doesn't care if you believe in it or not.
Right.
It still exists. Like gravity doesn't care if you believe in it or not. You still have your feet on the ground. Flat earthers can't be convinced. What's the definition of a fanatic? Someone who um, won't change their mind and can't change the subject, or can't change their mind and won't change the subject.
Yeah.
So
Well, and there's the not fanatic so much, but um, the idea that, well, I started off in the wrong direction here. What I wanted to get to was you're right, truth exists and truth is there. There's always some subjectivity to truth. Perception and truth
yeah,
come come into contact, and there's always going to be some friction there. But if you can be led to a truth, what you think is a truth, by someone who knows the truth. This is getting a little convoluted, but it's the people that are perpetuating the idea that the rich deserve to be rich because they're rich is being bought into by too many people, because they're being told that because you could be rich too.
yeah. You're not poor. You're a temporarily embarrassed billionaire, right?
Right. You're
Somebody
not
who's
poor. You're just broke.
yeah. You're just waiting. All you have to do is hit that lottery number or come up
Sure.
with that idea, that one idea. I think
Right.
Steve Martin's movie The Jerk just
Yeah.
parodied that brilliantly.
Right.
His
Right.
invention, right?
And when we still see that I mean, Elon Musk, I think, is the great example of somebody that everyone thinks he's this genius because he didn't invent an electric car. Obviously, those have been around for 100 years. He didn't.
He didn't even
Didn't
invent
even.
Tesla. He bought it from the guys
Yes.
who did.
Yeah. And what did he buy it with? The money he got from his parents, who own emerald mines in South
Yeah,
Africa. I
exactly.
mean, he's rich, and he got richer. Um, uh, yeah. So to me, he's the perfect example of
Yeah.
he's just a rich guy who's making himself richer.
Yeah.
He might
And
he
because he thinks he knows more than he knows.
right.
He is a self-appointed expert on everything. It's that and they want to know
They
what
want to know
shirt you
shirts.
wear.
Papers want to know whose shirts you wear.
Yes,
Major Tom.
Major Tom. Yeah, it's yeah,
Well, I think Jeff Bezos, who is just a really good exploiter, he I'll give him a certain amount of credit for creating a business model
yeah,
that worked beyond anybody's expectations ever. And but he doesn't put himself out there as this expert on everything. He's not on talk shows all the time. He's like, I have this business. The business runs itself. I don't have to do anything anymore. I'm just going to keep my money over here and leave me alone. Good for him. I have no problem with that guy. Except for the business has some exploitive tactics, just like Kmart and
yeah.
Walmart.
And the people who work there are the
Right.
exploitation. It is a it is a defensible position to take, and I've heard arguments for it, that anyone who gets to be a billionaire can only do so through the exploitation of other people's labor.
Or yeah, I suppose. I mean, that's kind of that's a very Marxist sort of way of looking at it. It's
I you don't have to be a Marxist. You don't have, a broken clock can be right twice a day.
yeah,
If it's analog. If it's digital, it doesn't work at all. But you, it's Marx wouldn't have been popular if he hadn't had a point.
yeah,
It's the taking of those ideas and trying to scale them into a communist state. That's where it breaks down.
right,
And I don't agree with Marxism, but I don't agree with laissez-faire capitalism either, you know?
right.
And
I think with the where there's a lot of things that are contributing to the problems we are having now, and some of them have to do with um, allowing things like Walmart and gigantic monopolistic companies
yes,
have proliferated through this country in the last 90 years.
well, I think that you can date a lot of this back to Reagan
Yeah.
and his deregulation, which enabled a lot of the um, corporate acquisitions that occurred throughout the 80s and 90s
But are still occurring.
and are still occurring.
So much so that it's now a recognized, we talked about this before, the recognized business model isn't making a company that competes and wins. It's just you create a company that is competitive enough for them to buy it from you.
Yes,
You just take
exactly.
your cash and leave.
Yes,
And then you start another business.
yes. I was years ago, I was teaching um, a survey of media class. So every week was a different form of media I talked about and the history of it and how it started and then how it got to its current state. And we were about halfway through the semester, and the students made two observations. And one was that very often the person who invented the technology that started this whole industry of media ended up dying poor. Their idea was taken by others who monetized it and they got nothing for it. Said yes. And they said the other thing, and some student they kind of are frustrated and slam their book. They say, can't believe it. It starts off this way, a person ends up poor. And now there were hundreds of companies doing this, and now there are 4 companies that own all of it. Said, yes. Yes. That's yes.
Yes, dang it, you're onto them.
There are, was it 4? I haven't checked the number. It's like 4 media conglomerates that control 90% of all media. 5, maybe 6 advertising marketing agency holding companies that control 80-90% of all
Yeah.
advertising companies.
Well, it's true in almost every industry.
Oil companies, airline companies. Yeah, absolutely, it's true in almost every industry.
I mean, Johnson and Johnson.
Yeah,
Um, uh,
they have so many brands,
Monsanto.
they should add another Johnson.
Well,
Procter and Gamble,
Procter and Gamble. Um,
Dow Chemical. Who owns Dow
yes.
Chemical? Somebody probably.
Now I think Dow Chemical's owned by 3M, maybe.
Yeah, could be. I honestly, keeping track of it, it's really hard to do.
The auto industry is
Yeah,
now getting smaller and smaller as far as, I mean, Chrysler isn't even an American company anymore.
yeah,
Was owned by Fiat, but Fiat's owned by a larger company.
yeah. And the I mean, the automotive brands that I worked on, I can tell you the ones I used to work on that are gone. I did work for
Pontiac, Oldsmobile.
Pontiac. I did work for Oldsmobile. I did work for Saab. I did work for Volvo. I did work for, all of these companies.
Well, Volvo's not gone.
Oh, no,
Neither
I mean,
Saab.
not Volvo. I mean, Saab. What was
Is
the other
Saab
one?
gone?
No, Saab is gone. Yeah.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Is
Not
that like
Volvo. Not Volvo. Saab. I forget. Oh, Saturn. Saturn.
oh, yeah.
Um, yeah. So many of them gone.
Yeah. So, and I don't know what we could do about it at this late stage. I mean,
Well,
as a,
that's why they call it late stage capitalism, I think. Well, that means a whole bunch of stuff, but
yeah.
so
So
we've
that's
talked
another
about myths and folklore, but I can tell you of all of them, I still believe in Santa Claus.
really, that's
I
sweet.
all I have to do is look in the mirror.
All right. Well, all you got to do is go downtown, and there he is standing next to the kettle.
Yeah, yeah, I won't give to those guys with the
Oh,
kettles.
yeah, I won't either.
They are not a good organization. I the little girl came to our door during trick-or-treating and looked up at me and asked me if I was Santa Claus. And so I knelt down and I said, don't tell anybody, but this is where I live when I'm not at the North Pole working. So I said, I know you've been a good girl, haven't you? She yes.
Of
She
course she
looked at
has.
her mother, said, of course I know. I know these things. So you can have extra pieces of candy. Now don't tell anybody.
That's right. That's
It was great. That was a great moment. We get a lot of trick-or-treaters.
yeah, we didn't know where we are. We're a little too rural for
Yeah. A lot of
not a high enough concentration to make it worthwhile here.
Well, I think we have thoroughly explored this subject and surprisingly several tangents.
No, well,
Uh,
we've got a reputation to uphold now. I
yeah,
mean,
that's true. Yeah.
we're closing in on our 100th episode.
We are. And I think we should plan something special for that.
Well, we talked about it. We need to narrow down and confirm our plans before the last episode. And it may be just a sort of going away present to one lucky listener, but
it may be. We'll see.
We'll see. If it generates enough interest, our offering, whatever it turns out to be,
Yeah.
who knows? Who knows? It'd be great if we got picked up by a larger organization. So we could monetize this a little bit.
Yeah, and then go start another podcast, right?
Right. Yeah, we'll just sell the rights to our name.
Yeah. There you go.
Take a little royalty and the American dream.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, thank you for listening.
Until that happens and we're independently wealthy.
So thank you for listening. Please like and share, and please send us your suggestions for topics. And until next time, be thou
a good knight
and true. So this is a reminder. Thank you for watching, but don't forget to post your comments and your suggestions for our next discussions.
Yep.
You could win a t-shirt. Thank you.
Good night.